I arrived at the Hartwell estate just after 2 in the afternoon. Savannah light slanting through the oaks like a benediction. My name is Eleanor Vale, though most people call me Nora. 71 years old, former architect, too practical to believe in grand entrances. Still, I'd spent the morning pressing my navy suit and polishing my low heels until they shone like discipline itself. It was my son's wedding day, something a mother doesn't show up to half-heartedly, no matter how strange the invitations felt. The front drive was lined with white limousines and photographers. When I stepped from my taxi, a young woman with a clipboard hurried over. "Vendor check-in is this way." "Ma'am," she said briskly. Before I could explain, she handed me a plastic badge and a lanyard. It read, in tidy black letters, "Event Assistant." For a moment, I thought it was a mix-up. Then I saw the way her eyes slid past me, the polite smile people reserve for the help. I almost laughed. At my age, you learn when a fight isn't worth the spectacle. I slipped the badge over my neck and followed the sound of the string quartet toward the gardens. Inside the reception tent, white roses bloomed from every surface. The place smelled of money and perfection. A pair of guests near the champagne table glanced my way. "That must be the florist's helper," one whispered. "Sweet of her to wear navy." Their laughter fluttered like a napkin caught in wind. I straightened my shoulders. Years of designing homes had taught me to hold my space, even when others pretended I wasn't there. Then I saw him, Gavin, tall, polished. My only child. His bride, Cecilia, glittered beside him in silk and lace, her parents flanking them like royalty. When his gaze brushed mine, he smiled an unfamiliar public smile. "Everyone," he said. "This is my father, Martin Devereaux." A gray-haired banker stepped forward, confident and bland, the kind of man who never doubted he belonged. The crowd applauded. Gavin didn't look at me again. I touched the edge of my badge, smoothing the lanyard against my suit as if it might stop trembling. The quartet began a new song, and I took my seat near the back, trying to remember how to breathe before the ceremony truly began. The Hartwell estate glimmered like a promise someone else had made. From my corner seat near the back, I watched waiters carry silver trays past chandeliers that probably cost more than my first office. Every polished surface, every rose-pink linen, bore a number that lived somewhere in my memory. I'd written the checks myself, each one like a quiet act of devotion. 85,000 for catering, 28 for flowers, 12 for the photographer. I'd transferred the deposits for the quartet, the calligrapher, the valet team. Even the napkins embroidered with Cecilia's initials had passed through my account. By the time the last invoice arrived, the total was just over $500,000. My $500,000 contribution to a day where I didn't seem to exist. When Arthur, my husband, died 25 years ago, Gavin was still in college. I'd had two choices: sell the house and start over, or build something that would outlast grief. I chose the latter. That choice became Vale Design and Restoration, a small firm that turned abandoned Savannah townhomes into living art again. I designed. I managed. I lifted planks and argued with contractors twice my size. Word spread the widow with the sharp pencil and steady hands who could see beauty under dust. That business raised my son. It paid for his schooling, his first car, and later, his first office in Charleston. When he'd called about the wedding mom, "They just need everything prepaid for assurance," I hadn't hesitated. Love doesn't check the fine print? Now, watching Cecilia glide past in her pearl gown, I thought of the last document sitting unsigned in my purse, the final transfer authorization. $340,000, waiting for my approval. My signature would complete the fairy tale. I rested my hand on the envelope, feeling the weight of it through the fabric. Money had always been my language of care, quiet, reliable, invisible. But tonight, for the first time, it felt like the currency of my own disappearance. They'd placed me at table 12, tucked neatly beside the catering entrance. Every few minutes, the kitchen doors swung open and released a warm gust of butter and rosemary. I didn't mind the noise. It gave me something to look at besides the shining world across the ballroom. The servers passed often enough to feel like company. One, a tall young man named Eli, refilled my water with a quiet smile. "You're braver than most guests sitting this close to the kitchen." "Ma'am," he joked. I smiled back. "I've spent half my life on job sites. Noise doesn't bother me." His grin widened, and for a brief moment, I wasn't invisible. Across the vast room, Gavin stood beneath a halo of chandeliers, his tuxedo cut perfectly to his narrow shoulders. Lionel Hartwell, Cecilia's father, had a hand clapped on Gavin's back as though he'd acquired him rather than welcomed him. Their laughter carried easily above the music. Cecilia shimmered in her $35,000 gown, all ivory silk and assurance. They looked like a painting titled "New Money Meets Old Comfort." I sipped my sparkling water, tracing the condensation with my thumb. I should have felt pride. Instead, I felt the distance like watching my own reflection from behind glass. A voice startled me. "Nora Vale, is that you?" I turned. Margaret Linley, one of my earliest clients, stood there in a pale lilac dress, her smile bright with recognition. "Goodness, it's been years. You must be so proud of Gavin." Her words floated outward like a stone dropped in still water. The nearby guests fell silent, their glances shifting. One woman leaned to another, whispering, "His mother." I thought she wasn't invited. Margaret blinked, confused by the sudden hush. "Did I say something wrong?" "No," I said softly, forcing a smile. "You just remembered something everyone else was told to forget." The music swelled again, filling the pause. Across the room, Gavin's laughter faltered, just for a heartbeat. I watched him recover, slipping easily back into conversation, and realized I was no longer hurt, just quietly taking note of how far the truth had traveled without me. The scent of the roses and the hum of the band faded into the background as my mind drifted backward, years collapsing like folded blueprints. Gavin was 12 the first time he sat beside me at my drafting table. His elbows barely reached the edge as he watched me sketch the bones of a Georgian porch on tracing paper. "It's like magic," he'd whispered. "You draw lines and a house appears." I remember laughing. Not magic. Sweetheart measurements and patience. Back then, he used to fall asleep on the sofa with rolls of vellum around him, dreaming of the homes we'd one day restore together. For a while, I believed that might be our shared future. At 19, he stood in the doorway of a half-finished project, dust on his shoes and disdain in his voice. "I'll never live in a fixer-upper again," he said, as if the cracked walls were contagious. I'd understood even then he wanted a life untouched by struggle. I thought education would soften that hunger. It didn't. I paid for his degree at the Savannah College of Art and Design, then graduate school in Boston. When he wanted his first investment condo, I signed the loan guarantee without hesitation. He called it a temporary stepping stone. I called it love. It was in Boston that he met Cecilia Hartwell, the daughter of a family that measured worth by legacy plaques and foundations. Gavin sent photos of her parents' mansion, the marble staircase, the antique piano she grew up playing. I heard the awe in his voice, the kind that comes from seeing a door you never realized existed months later, over dinner. he'd said lightly. They think Dad was an investor. Let's keep it that way, it's simpler. I'd stared at him, trying to find the boy who once traced beams and joists beside me. He looked away before I could speak. Now, watching him glide among chandeliers and handshakes, I understood the illusion he'd built and the part of myself I'd unknowingly financed. Dinner had settled into its golden hour rhythm, crystal clinking. Polite laughter, the hum of the string quartet weaving through conversation. From my seat near the back, I watched the toasts begin. Cecilia's maid of honor spoke first, her voice trembling through practiced sweetness. Then Gavin's best man, charming and self-assured. Each speech built the illusion higher, layer upon layer of perfect sentiment. When Lionel Hartwell rose, the chatter fell away. His presence carried the easy gravity of a man used to being obeyed. He lifted his glass, the diamonds on his cufflinks scattering the chandelier light. Tonight, he said, we celebrate not only two remarkable young people, but the families who shaped them. I'd like to honor the woman who raised Gavin with such grace and character. He turned, smiling toward Margaret Hartwell, Cecilia's mother, to Margaret, for raising a man worthy of our daughter. Applause erupted steady, confident, unquestioning. Photographers leaned forward. Flashes pulsed like white heat. Gavin smiled, eyes bright, as if he'd waited for this precise moment of acceptance. I lowered my gaze to my half-empty champagne glass. Tiny bubbles rose, collapsed, rose again like something trying to surface and being smothered each time. The applause swelled into a standing ovation. I sat perfectly still, back straight, palms flat on the tablecloth. When the clapping finally ebbed, the music resumed, cheerful and oblivious. I let my gaze wander, catching sight of Cassie Monroe, the venue manager, standing discreetly near the service doors. She glanced at her phone, thumb scrolling quickly, brow furrowed, probably confirming that the final $340 transfer was still pending. The thought steadied me. My humiliation found its footing in fact numbers, contracts, signatures that couldn't be rewritten by a toast. Around me, the Hartwells moved through their curated joy, their laughter slick as glass. I reached for my water instead of wine, my hand perfectly steady now. Let them finish, I whispered under the music. My voice didn't shake this time. The room could keep its applause. I still held the one thing they all depended on. The ballroom lights shimmered off glassware and sequins as servers began clearing dinner plates. I felt the pulse of conversation shifting toward ease again, the crowd riding that gentle post-toast high. Then I saw Cassie Monroe weaving her way through the tables, her professionalism wrapped tight as her dark blazer. She stopped beside me, leaning just enough to be discreet. "Miss Vale," she said softly, "may I confirm the transfer authorization for the final balance?" Her tone carried no judgment, just procedure. I placed my napkin on the table, smoothed the crease with my thumb, and stood. "Not yet," I replied, my voice calm. Cassie hesitated, searching my face, then nodded once. I could feel eyes following me as I walked toward the stage heels steady against the polished floor. The string quartet faltered for half a beat before resuming in a softer key. I reached the microphone. My hands didn't tremble. The Hartwells were gathered near the head table, still laughing about something private, while Gavin gestured animatedly beside them. "Before we continue celebrating," I said, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system, "there's one small matter, the remaining $340,000 owed for this event." The room froze. Chairs creaked. Somewhere, a glass clinked against a plate and then fell silent. I glanced toward Cassie, who was already checking her clipboard, her professionalism now taut with uncertainty. "Every contract signed for this wedding," I continued, "bears my name. Every vendor was paid by my company. I am the client. I paused, letting the words land where they needed to. And I am Gavin's mother. Gasps moved through the crowd like wind across a field. Phones lifted, their tiny red lights blinking. Lionel Hartwell blinked twice, disbelief clouding his face. Cecilia's hand flew to her mouth. Gavin's chair scraped sharply against the floor, but he didn't speak. I simply stepped back from the microphone, my pulse even, my posture unbroken. For the first time that evening, no one seemed certain which side of the room held the power. For a long, suspended moment, no one moved. The hum of the chandelier lights was the only sound left in the room. Faces turned toward me, some curious, others startled. A few openly afraid that whatever was happening might ripple into their perfect evening. I looked toward Cassie Monroe, who stood near the sound booth, her clipboard now clutched tight against her chest. "Ms. Monroe," I said evenly, "tell me something. Do you serve guests who are ashamed of their own family?" Her mouth parted, but no answer came. Even she seemed to feel the shift in the air, the weight pressing down on the room. 100 eyes turned from me to Gavin, then back again. Gavin rose halfway from his chair, his complexion drained. "Mother, please," he whispered, voice barely carrying. I met his gaze steady, unflinching. "You wanted me quiet, Gavin. I've been quiet all evening. I've listened to strangers rewrite your life, watched them toast another woman for my work, but there comes a point when silence becomes complicity." Cassie hesitated only a moment longer. "Ma'am," she began carefully, "would you like to proceed with the final payment authorization?" I pulled my phone from my clutch. The glow of the screen reflected faintly in my glass. My thumb hovered over the app, then slid to the small red circle labeled Cancel Transfer. The confirmation icon flashed once, soft and final. Cassie exhaled through her nose, then straightened. Her voice carried through the microphone system with calm authority. "Per contractual terms, with the balance remaining unpaid. Service will conclude at the completion of the dinner course." The announcement rolled through the ballroom like thunder muffled by velvet. Waiters paused mid-step, uncertain. The violinist lowered her bow. Guests looked around, whispering, afraid to move first. Lionel Hartwell's jaw tightened. Cecilia's hand gripped Gavin's arm. He stared at me, stunned, as if he couldn't quite comprehend that the control he'd spent years claiming had always been borrowed. I slipped my phone back into my bag and took my seat again. My pulse was calm, my wine untouched. The lesson didn't need shouting. It had already been delivered, line by contractual line. At first, it was almost imperceptible, the shift from elegance to unease. The violinist set her bow down, confusion flickering across her face as the quartet fell silent. Then the kitchen doors swung open, and the catering staff began clearing the plates. Mid-course, movements quick and professional, like soldiers executing an evacuation plan. A ripple passed through the guests. Conversations trailed off. Someone near the head table whispered, "Is this part of the program?" No one answered. Lionel Hartwell rose from his seat, cheeks flushed. "Cassie, this is unacceptable," he barked, his voice carrying across the room. "Do you have any idea who we are?" Cassie kept her tone steady. "Yes, Mr. Hartwell, and I also know who signed the contracts." The murmur turned into a low roar of disbelief. The photographers lowered their cameras. The guests began checking their phones as if hoping the evening could be reassembled by signal alone. At the edge of the room, Deidre Kane, a journalist for the Savannah Register, slipped out her phone and began recording. Her instinct for story was unerring. I could already imagine the headline: Socialite wedding ends mid-reception after mother cancels $340,000 payment. Across the chaos, Gavin stood frozen. Cecilia was crying quietly, mascara bleeding into her veil. Lionel's wife hissed something about optics and press damage. Their words swirled like perfume, sharp, expensive, and empty. Then Gavin broke from the table and came toward me, his steps unsteady. "Mom, please," he said, voice cracking. "You've ruined everything." I looked up at him, at the boy who once helped me measure door frames and hold ladders. My tone was quiet, but certain. "No, Gavin, I just stopped paying for it. For a heartbeat." Neither of us moved. Then he looked around at the faces watching him, his in-laws, his colleagues. His new bride and I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not anger, not grief, recognition. By the time I left the estate, the moon was hanging low over the river, its reflection breaking in the tide. Behind me, the music never started again. By morning, Savannah's social circles buzzed with the story. The Vale incident, they were calling it. Coffee shops, law firms, even my old clients whispered about the woman who'd reminded an entire city that debts, financial or otherwise, always come due. 3 weeks after the wedding, I was in my office sketching a renovation for an old carriage house when the doorbell rang. Through the glass, I saw Gavin standing on the porch. His posture was smaller than I remembered, his tuxedo perfection traded for rolled sleeves and quiet humility. I opened the door without a word. He held his breath, as if waiting for a verdict. "Mom," he began, "I know I don't deserve to be here." His voice carried the rasp of sleepless nights. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he used to do geometry homework while I calculated load-bearing walls. He ran a hand through his hair, eyes fixed on the floor. "The annulment went through last week," he said. "Cecilia's family wanted a clean break. The papers said misrepresentation. Guess that's accurate enough." He let out a small, humorless laugh. "I poured us both coffee. And you? I've been thinking about what you said," he murmured. "All I ever wanted was for them to like me. I forgot you were the reason I was worth liking in the first place." He looked up then, and for the first time in years, I saw not the polished stranger from the ballroom, but the boy who once built model houses from cereal boxes beside me. "There's a position open at Vale Design," I said. "Junior apprentice, under Emma Tran. She's half your age, but twice as organized. You'll take instructions from her, not from me. The pay's modest. The lessons aren't." Gavin's shoulders lifted with something between relief and shame. "I'll take it. I don't want comfort anymore. I want to earn something that lasts." Later that evening, after he left, I walked into my study. Above my drafting desk hung the framed staff badge from that night, a small, square reminder that respect doesn't come from where you're seated, but from what you stand for. I picked up my pencil and drew a clean line across the tracing paper. Steady and sure. Some structures, once rebuilt, stand stronger than before, and so do the people who learn how to build them.